Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off because today I will be reviewing and paging through the Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition Investigator Handbook from Chaosium Inc. So, is this essentially a must have for Call of Cthulhu players both old and new? Or should you cast your prying eyes elsewhere? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I am Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel, as well as the Grand Poobah at thegaminggang.com. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be reviewing the Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition Investigator Handbook in just a moment, but I do want to remind you, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ring that notification bell because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also tell you when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube Monday through Thursday nights. And of course, when you are not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am reviewing the Call of Cthulhu Investigator Handbook. Yes, I know the video open showed Investigator's Handbook. Oh, well, actually, that's what I keep calling it that. So I know it's not the title, but it's what I keep calling it. Anyway, the Investigator Handbook is from Chaosium Inc. It's written by Sandy Peterson, Mike Mason, Keith Herber, Paul Fricker, and Lynn Willis, as well as friends. Now, who these mysterious friends are, I don't know. This 268-page hardcover is available for $44.95. It is also available as part of a slipcase set, which includes the Keeper's Guide as well as the Game Master screen, or the Keeper's screen, I should say. That is available for $129.99. That is how I got my copy, because Michael O'Brien and the fine folks over at Chaosium were kind enough to send me the slipcase for review. You can also grab this book in softcover for $34.99. It is currently on sale for $29.99 over at the Chaosium Inc. website. I don't know how long that sale is going to be in place, but as of this recording, it is on sale. You can also grab the PDF over at DriveThruRPG for $22.99. Of course, I always like to point out, if you are going to visit DriveThruRPG or any of the other One Bookshelf sites, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banner ads, and that way, if you make a purchase, I get a little portion of that sale. And all those little portions really do add up and help keep the Gaming Gang around. All right, without further ado, let's swing on over to the other camera. We're going to dive in. I'm going to share my thoughts on the Call of Cthulhu Investigator Handbook. So as you can see, oh, look at this. We've got a bookmark. Oh, gotta love that. I love how the European printing editions of various different role-playing game books always have a bookmark, sometimes two. And here in the US, almost never see that. So I thought that was kind of cool. All right, let's take a look at the back real quick. And then we're going to jump inside. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. H.P. Lovecraft. Will you stand against the horrors of the night? Whether learned professor, nosy journalist, or hard-hitting detective, investigators need all the help they can get. Let this book be your guide. The Investigator Handbook is an essential player's aid for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. Written for those who will be playing the roles of investigators, the Investigator Handbook contains expanded rules for creating player characters, a wealth of over 100 occupations and skill descriptions, and guidance on getting the most from the game. What's more, There are a range of organizations for your investigators to belong to, detailed information about the classic 1920s setting, equipment, and weapons for both the 1920s and modern day, and expert tips and advice for all budding investigators. No self respecting investigator of the Cthulhu mythos should be without it. Ah, ha, ha. All right, so we're going to jump in. I should preface my review and page through with the fact that I have been running Call of Cthulhu since 1981. In all of that time, I think I've played once as an investigator. Every other time I have been the keeper, or as I've always just referred to it as game master. So we're going to jump on in here, and some of my thoughts about the investigator handbook are going to be colored by the fact that I have run Call of Cthulhu for so long. I will mention I am not going to share any thoughts or critique on the actual mechanics of the game. I am saving that for my review of the Keeper's Guide. All right, so we're jumping in here. So one of the first things I'm going to point out, as someone who has been running Call of Cthulhu, or as we've always referred to it, C of C. I know most people abbreviate it COC, but we always call it C of C. I love that we have a full color book. Back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I don't mean 20, 30 years ago. I mean about 10 years ago. We here in the US who had the Chaosium books used to sit there, and don't get me wrong, the black and white artwork in the previous editions was always really good. But we would see these foreign language productions, and they just had this amazing color artwork. And we'd sit as a gamer, it'd be like, oh, why can't we get one of those? Why can't I speak Spanish or Italian, or at least read it? So we're gonna jump in here, and we've got our introduction to the game. So we get a little bit of an example of play. It's going to talk about some of the basics of the game as well. It's going to show a little example of play without any Harvey Walters, amazingly enough. Although we will see Harvey make an appearance. Yes, Harvey has been floating around various editions of Call of Cthulhu since day one. So what you're going to need to play, it's going to talk about the dice. There we go. There are the dice. But there's a lot of visual pop here. Really, really impressive. So, of course, a game entitled Call of Cthulhu, which is based on H.P. Lovecraft's work, as well as, of course, the story Call of Cthulhu, has the Dunwich Horror. So that is the first time that a Call of Cthulhu rule book, essentially, has included a story other than the Call of Cthulhu. And there's a reason behind this. And that's because the Dunwich Horror actually plays out, when you read it, kind of like a Call of Cthulhu adventure. The Call of Cthulhu really doesn't, because the Call of Cthulhu is 3 relatively interconnected stories. So you get the full text of the Dunwich Horror, which is actually a really good story. It is one of my favorites. And yes, it is very much kind of like a Call of Cthulhu adventure, told from the point of view of an investigator who happens to be Professor Armitage. This is supposedly the Dunwich Horror, who spends most of its time invisible. If you are not familiar with Call of Cthulhu or the Cthulhu mythos, it is, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under, but Call of Cthulhu is a game of investigation. There is combat. Combat's very deadly. Violence is very, 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 very deadly in this game. And Call of Cthulhu has a reputation. I never actually ran it like this, but it does have a reputation where it's a meat grinder for player characters. This 7th edition changes that a bit. And I will discuss that more in depth when I review the Keeper's Guide. But one thing that a lot of players over the years, when they're creating investigators, they're kind of like, well, I don't know if this character is going to last more than, this session of this adventure, let alone throughout an entire campaign. So sometimes people didn't invest a ton of work into their characters. This situation here, yes, you're going to actually invest a bit more time rolling up your character, probably have a little more thought involved as well. There we go. There's good old Harvey Walters, the famed Call of Cthulhu beginning investigator. So it's going to talk about the different attributes. So we kind of have the traditional role-playing game attributes. We've got strength, constitution, size is a little bit different. Size comes into play, especially with your hit points. Dexterity, appearance, intelligence, power, which is sort of how well you mesh with the universe in general. And then we've got education, you tend to have a higher education score in Call of Cthulhu because traditionally the Lovecraftian protagonists came from kind of like learned professions. So we've got an example of investigator creation. Rolling up a Call of Cthulhu character is not difficult, and it does not take a ton of time. So this is just walking you through the whole process here. Choosing an occupation. I love the fact that there are tons of occupations in this book. If I remember back to, say, first edition Call of Cthulhu, there may have been 20 grand total. So we've got some backstory, some background information as well here, some tables you can roll on if you want to. But like I said, you're going to invest a little more time in your character creation for 7th edition than maybe you would have spent in the meat grinder of 6th edition and before. We also have a quick reference chart for the values of your skills. So in essence, Call of Cthulhu is based upon the basic role-playing system from Chaosium. It's percentile based, which pretty much originates from original RuneQuest. I almost said RuneCraft. Why would I say that? It's like, no, RuneQuest, Jeff. Slap, slap. Hey, at least I'm speaking English today, so that's good. So essentially, one of the changes in 7th edition is that those attributes used to be kind of the traditional role-playing game 3 through 18. And then we had different resistance tables and things like that where we had to convert that over to percentile anyway. So now it's just straight out, it's as a percentile. So you're still rolling 3 6-sided dice, or you might roll things a little differently depending on how your keeper wants to run their game. And of course, some of the attributes do have, for an example, like size is 2d6 plus 6. Usually you'll have education is 3d6 plus 3. So you're just going to multiply those by 5. So you're going to have anything from 15 to 85. Oh, no, I'm sorry, to 90. What am I thinking? So 15 to 90 as far as your characteristics, as far as your attributes. Now, we also have half values and fifth values. So, and this comes into play as well with the different skills. So normally being a percentile-based game, if you're rolling against an attribute, rolling against a skill, you're going to have a number you're looking to roll less than. So if I have a drive skill of 45 and we're in the midst of a big chase and we've got cultists firing guns at us and from another vehicle and we're trying to lose them, and I'm going to end up having to make some drive rolls. So, of course, I'm going to roll my percentile dice, which is going to give me a number from 1 to 100. And I'm going to hopefully roll below my 45. Now, if something really difficult happens, then I might have to roll under half of that, or maybe 1/5 of that. There is also advantage and disadvantage included in this as well. So you can add an additional 10 die and either take the lowest result. So you're actually rolling two tens and one single digit die, and you're taking the lowest. That's if you have advantage. And if you have disadvantage, you're actually taking the higher roll. So much more likely to fail with the disadvantage, much more likely to succeed with advantage. Aha, statue of great Cthulhu himself. I always find it funny because most people do pronounce Cthulhu, although I believe the gentleman's name is T.S. Yoshi, who is a Lovecraftian scholar, really. If you want to know anything about H.P. Lovecraft stories, you talk to this guy. He swears up and down, or he has said, that Lovecraft actually meant Cthulhu to be almost unpronounceable. So it was not supposed to be able to be uttered by a human tongue. So it's kind of supposed to be pronounced like Tohu, Tohu. Most of us kind of just say Cthulhu. So here we've got a list of occupations, and there are loads of them. We've got, well, we'll take a look. Just show some of them off. Agency detective, an accountant, an alienist, which is classic. So we'll see the occupations that are traditional Call of Cthulhu occupations are going to be marked as classic. And then we have Lovecraftian. So that's it's a little bit different than what maybe you would think, like an archaeologist, Lovecraftian. And it talks about, gives you a little explanation of what each of these occupations are. When I would run Call of Cthulhu for the longest campaign that I ran, and this was for years, and I was not one of these keepers who would just, kill off the characters all willy-nilly. My best friend, Elliot Miller, always played an author. Anthony Piers. I'll never forget that. Anthony Piers, because at the time, Elliot's favorite author was actually Piers Anthony. Now we're talking, this is the 80s, right? And then my good friend, Ed Ruprecht, Stephen Gruber. Oh my gosh, I haven't thought of that character name in years. And he, if I remember right, he was a PI. And then Paul Miller, Elliot's nephew, he tended to have the character that took dirt naps a lot. So he played a lot of different occupations. So we've got doctors, elected official, firefighter, gangster, gentleman, lady, journalist, laboratory assistant. So a lot of these are brand new. Mountain climber, musician. I don't think I remember seeing musician before. Parapsychologist. That's what Ed's character was. He was a parapsychologist. There we go. I'm like, what was he? What was his occupation? So as you can see, it's going to go through. It's going to give you a little bit of information about each of these occupations. You're going to have skill points that you get to spend. So it's going to also talk about the skills you get to spend your points on, because for the most part, the vast majority of your skill points are going to be spent into skills that have to do with your occupation. You will have various different pools of skill points that you can use. Now, there will also be it's a smaller pool of skill points that you can utilize for various different skills and hobbies that you choose. But let's jump back here for a second. So let's say, as an example, we've got a soldier or Marine. So it gives us a breakdown, a little bit of background about that. So it tells us occupation skill points, education ×2 plus dex ×2 or strength ×2. Credit rating, that basically just talks about, like, credit rating is sort of your wealth as well as your social status. And then it's going to show us the skills. Now, these are the skills that you would put these occupation skill points to use with: climb or swim, dodge, fighting, firearms, stealth, survival, and 2 of the following: first aid, mechanical repair, or other language. as we see, there's some really cool artwork throughout this book as well. And then we have some art that's a little, I guess, I don't want to say it's bad, but I do find that the artwork overall is a little uneven. We'll see some artwork that's like, wow, that is really cool. And then we'll see other artwork and you're kind of like, huh, okay. Hey, but it's all in color. So there is that. So now this goes into discussing skills. And one of the aspects that I really do like about the skill section here is that it's going to talk about different uses for this skill. Yeah. When are you going to use credit rating? When do you use say for an example, driving? You're not just going to like drive auto. You're not going to simply use drive auto anytime that character is driving an auto. So essentially, even with a lot of these skills, and maybe it's just the way I've always run it, and I believe it's kind of pretty much a given where if it's something very basic that would fall into something that you would know from one of these skills, especially if the skill is something kind of like knowledge based, that I mean the very basics, you're not rolling dice. Now I'm sure that there are some game masters out there, some keepers out there who you're rolling skills for your dice against skills all the time. I personally did not. Now there are different mechanics here for being able to push your roll. Your luck attribute now comes into play that you can spend luck points to succeed. So you just make up the difference in points to bring your roll down so that you can succeed. You don't want to do that a whole lot because your luck will run out in more ways than one. So just talking about all the different skills here. Now we get into a section, we start getting into some sections of the book here that, as someone who has been running this for decades, I like the information in here, but the problem is this is all player facing info. This is supposed to be a book dedicated to the players, to the investigators. And some of this stuff, in my opinion, kind of ruins the surprise. Now, I get it. Running role playing games and playing in role playing games nowadays in the 21st century is quite different than playing in the 1980s. Many more people are familiar with the Cthulhu mythos and H.P. Lovecraft's work than they were back then. Hell, Cthulhu shows up in Gravity Falls. So it's pretty funny to see how the Lovecraft mythos has really penetrated and just kind of seeped into pop culture. H.P. Lovecraft would have never dreamed that because he pretty much died penniless and unknown for the most part. When I was talking about some of the artwork where it's kind of like, I mean, it's fine. It's okay. It's just when we see all this other art, which is like really eye popping, and then that a little different. So anyway, so we've got these different organizations that the investigators can belong to. And with beginning investigators, I don't know if I necessarily want them having this kind of information available to them. Plus, as a keeper, I may not want to utilize some of these organizations. So just kind of floating that out there. Then we get into another section, life as an investigator, which also has some information that I don't know if I would want my players to have. There is a lot of information in here that's very good, but there is some, and in fact, I'll show you in just a second. We'll get to it in a minute. But there are a lot of items in here that I do think are very worthwhile for the players to check out. Like, don't rely on guns. Don't rely on combat or explosives or anything like that. See, we get stuff like team composition, communication specialist, fighters, scholars, mechanic, archivist, understudies, photographer, different equipment. So, this stuff I like. I do like that. Planning for the future, making a will, proteges. This is what I'm not super keen on because now the players are getting to see. Now, granted, they're just little images, but they get to see the various different Cthulhu mythos creatures. Not all of them, but a vast majority of them, a lot of them. Kind of comparisons and things like that. I don't necessarily want them to have this information. Just me. It is just me. And these are just my critiques as somebody who's run this game for a long, long time and who has kind of an old school sort of mentality towards a lot of the role playing games that I run. I do like, for an example, I like characters who their backstories are created basically during gameplay. Those are the stories that we're creating together, as opposed to someone who spends hours concocting a backstory for a character and then expecting me as a game master to, kind of like shoehorn that in to what I'm running. So now we get into the Roaring 20s chapter. Lots of good material here. Of course, the 1920s are the traditional, I should say, is the traditional era of Call of Cthulhu. You can also kind of segue a little further into the 1930s very easily. There is information here if you want to run a modern game of Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu, there is various different books out there, different supplements out there that you can run Call of Cthulhu anywhere from the era of the French Revolution to the Wild West to the Roman Empire to modern. So there's lots of options out there. The basic role-playing system is very, very easily ported over to all different eras. So now we start getting into weapons. I like this. I like the fact that we get to see images of, okay, so that's what a Mauser looks like. This is what a Winchester shotgun, 1887 shotgun, a 1901 shotgun look like. So I do appreciate the fact that we are seeing some of these different guns. Although, as an investigator, don't rely on guns, even automatic weapons. So we get some 1920s biographies. One of the fun things that I used to do all the time, not so much anymore, but way back in the day, I would tend to throw famous people into the mix of my Call of Cthulhu adventures. Not, like they were big NPCs or anything like that. But I'll give you an example. I ran one adventure where my investigators were on a train from New York, and it just happened to be the train that transported the New York Yankees. And so they were on a road trip. And of course, they had their own separate cars. But the players my investigators ended up kind of, drinking beers with the guys from the Yankees. Of course, it's prohibition. It was illegal, but still. So one thing I have to laugh, we've got Johnny Weissmuller, who was a famed swimmer. And of course, he played Tarzan in many, he was Tarzan in the most movies, but they're old, like I think from the 30s and 40s. He actually went to my high school, Lane Tech in Chicago. There were quite a few famous people who went to Lane Tech, although he dropped out to support his family. So we talk about religion, crime, journalism. Yeah, Walter Winchell. Oh, trying to remember, how did Walter Winchell open up? Mr. Yeah, here we go. Mr. and Mrs. North America and all the ships at sea. Flash. I have, over the decades, I have done lots and lots of research into the 1920s. There you go, Howard Carter. King Tut. Prince Harry Price. Who's Harry Price? Was he Wait a second. Was he trying to remember if he was somebody who was no, yep, there you go, parapsychologist. I thought he was a debunker. Couldn't remember. Robert Goddard. So we've got we got notable libraries and museums. We start talking about like famous songs, famous musicals, newspapers of the 20s. Now, this is back in the day when many major cities had multiple daily papers. See, Illinois, Chicago Herald and Examiner, the Chicago American, Chicago Tribune, Evansville Press. There were more newspapers than just that. What do they show for New York? Look at this. Albany Times Union, Buffalo News, New York American, New York Daily Times, New York Journal, New York Post, New York Telegram, New York Times, Rochester Journal, Syracuse Journal, the Wall Street Journal. All those were daily newspapers that were, for the most part, available to you in the city of New York. Newspapers from around the globe. So you've got a lot of really great information here, not just for the investigators. This is fantastic information for the keepers as well. Then we get into the advice for the players. And a lot of this is good. I do like this. There's actually one section in here is talking about don't hog the spotlight. There you go. Don't rely on guns. Having multiple investigators. Most role players I know, they're not super big on this. Now, they don't mind having a character in reserve. A lot of times they don't like playing multiple characters. Problems in play. I like the fact that Chaosium included this because you don't run across this in too many role-playing game books where it's saying, okay, well, these are some things that might come up at the table that you want to keep an eye out for. So here we go, like problems with other players, hogging the limelight, paying attention. Paying attention is a big one with me, especially with Call of Cthulhu, because it is so much of an investigatory game. You got to pay attention. So I don't allow phones at my table. You can have the phone. You just had to have it on mute. But no, sitting there, surfing the internet and things like that while we're playing. Absolutely not. No texting, anything like that. So it talks a bit about some of the player-facing mechanics, pushing your roll if you fail, which essentially is pushing your roll means that you're going to get a chance to roll it again. But if you fail, boy, how do you fail? So pushing perception rolls, social interaction, talking about skills, talking about different contexts, combat. As I mentioned before, Call of Cthulhu does not tend to be a very combat-heavy game. That's why you won't find, and you'll see this if you check out my upcoming review of the Keeper's Guide, you'll see that there aren't tons of pages devoted to combat. So now we start getting into some reference. We get a timeline to the modern day as well. There you go. Can we all get along? Jeez. So that's back from 92. I think that kind of speaks to us now too. Can't we all get along? So we're going to get into some different travel distances. We're going to get into pricing and equipment. I love all these old catalog images that are included. I love the fact that we had some pulp magazine images earlier on. So these are all 1920s. And this information is vital to keepers as well as investigators. We also get some modern day pricing, which of course is going to change. And then we're going to finish up with our weapons table references. We're going to have a player character sheet. Have two, actually. We've got one for the 20s and one for modern. There you go. Converting from previous editions of Call of Cthulhu, which is super easy because we haven't seen tons of changes. There are changes, though. Very cool map of Lovecraft Country where these places don't exist. Arkham doesn't exist. Innsmouth doesn't exist. Then we get an index, and then there we go. There's our player character sheets for the 20s and for modern. And then finally, we have a list of all the folks who did playtesting, as well as those who backed the Kickstarter to bring the 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu to life. Now we get some advertisements at the end here as well, showing off some of the other cool items that are available. There's our Dunwich Horror once again. Secret knowledge. There we go. All righty then. So that is what we find as we page through the Investigator Handbook. Let's swing on over to the other camera and I will share my final thoughts as well as provide a review score. So now that we're swung back over to the other camera, I know I had some critiques that I've floated out there. There's information in the book that, my players, I wouldn't necessarily want them to have, especially people who've never played Call of Cthulhu before. I think part of the magic of the game is not only you can make it pretty damn scary, it's also the discovery of all the various different creatures and just monsters and the old ones and all that stuff that maybe most people don't really know about. They've seen some Lovecraft stuff. They've maybe seen one of the Lovecraft films that have been made over the years. Maybe they've read a story or two, but they don't know all about Shoggoths and things like that. So once again, I'm just pointing out that from my point of view, as someone who's run Call of Cthulhu for decades over multiple different editions, some of the info I just don't necessarily want my players to have. That said, I think the Investigator Handbook is really, really nicely done. I love the vast majority of the artwork. I love all the reference materials in here. It doesn't overwhelm players as far as what, like mechanically, what for the like player facing, right? It kind of discusses, okay, so here's how you make a skill roll. Here's how you push your roll, but it doesn't go into like tons and tons of just like minutia about these things, which players don't necessarily need to know. A lot of times, game masters don't need to know that either. But there is just a treasure trove of info in this book. Is this an essential? See, now that's where I kind of question. I really do like the book. Is it essential for all the players to have a copy of it? I don't think so. Is it essential for a keeper to have a copy of it? There is some redundancy between both the Keeper's Guide and the Investigator Handbook. Not a ton, but there is some. There is some crossover, some repetition. I think so. I think as a keeper, this is probably more essential than as a player. Now, what I would probably recommend is maybe if you're going to get, say, the Investigator Handbook in PDF, share certain sections with your players. Don't share the whole book with the players. But that's just, just my thoughts on it. Anyway, all in all, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give Call of Cthulhu's 7th edition Investigator Handbook a 9 out of 10. Once again, I just have minor quibbles. It's just my own personal opinions on things. But I have to look at this as most gamers. How will most gamers look at this? And yes, I give it a 9 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. So I want to point out that if you like the video, be sure to give it a quick thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that little notification bell because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also inform you when my live show, The Daily Dope, streams right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights. All right, so until next time, as I've been pretty much wrapping up and kind of closing out all my videos during this pandemic, let me point out and ask to make sure that you be smart and stay safe. Oh, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. And of course, if you want to catch up on past episodes of The Daily Dope, check out this playlist. And if you'd like to see what YouTube's recommending you take a peek at from the channel, just give a click right over here. Of course, I'm Jeff McAleer, and once again, thank you very much for watching.